Hello everyone, it's Gigabeef here, and today we're going to go through the entire ammo chart to give you a good idea of what you should be looking out for when making decisions around what bullets to take with you. There's a serious number of rounds to choose from in Tarkov, so stick around and let's get into it. Alright, so here we are, my favourite page of the Tarkov wiki, which is the Ballistics page, which includes the ammo chart, which I reference in almost every video that I make. Now, I've never made a full video about the ammo chart, which is what this is going to be about, and a couple of people asked me about it, and I think it's so important. Let's just get into it, and there's a couple of nuances, and it sometimes takes a little bit of experience to distill the information here and figure out exactly how to choose what ammo you're going to use, because there are so many rounds in Tarkov, as I said before, that it can be quite overwhelming, especially if you're new, to figure out exactly what you need to be running. Okay, so this page does have some useful information about flight ballistics, terminal ballistics, and other stuff that you should probably have a look at, especially if you're a new player. Give it a read through. It is quite interesting if you're into the mechanics of games like this, which if you're playing Tarkov, you probably are, given that that's the kind of game that it is. But in terms of the ammo chart in general, when you first look at it as a new player, kind of just looks like a bunch of random numbers and colours, but it's quite simple really when you get into the details of it. What we're going to do is really break it down to basics though and say, okay, what's important about a round? Every round in the game is given a penetration power and a damage. And what does this mean? So if you're fighting against somebody without any armour, you're going to inflict your damage to the other player when you shoot them. Ignore any long range ballistics or slow down on those rounds just for the moment, because we don't need to go into those details right this second. On the flip side of this, we've got armor, right? So that goes from level 1 through to level 6 in terms of effectiveness. So level 6 is the most effective at stopping bullets, and level 1 is the least effective. And so this penetration power combines with the effectiveness of your opponent's armor to determine how likely a round is to penetrate through and be able to inflict the damage of the round on your opponent. And so this is what the ammo chart tries to do. It says for every single round with a given penetration power, what is the effectiveness of that round against armor at all these different classes? And what's important about this is ranked from 0 through to 6, and there's some definitions at the top which is useful to pay attention to. So at 0, you basically can't penetrate through at all, no matter how many times you shoot them. Imagine something like a flesh damage round that's supposed to split up. If that hits a steel plate, it's just going to disintegrate, it's never going to go through. On the other end, you've got 6, which means that the bullet effectively ignores the armor completely. It's an AP round against a mediocre piece of armor, so it's just going to go straight through and you're never going to get any chance to stop that round at all. Now, the one place that I would be careful about is number 4. Number 4 is quite often a value trap for players, and I actually fell into this trap quite a lot when I was first learning the game, is that it says 4 and effective, and you think, well, 4 out of 6 is probably okay, but what this means in the definition is 3 to 5 bullets are going to be stopped by the armor that you're fighting against. And really what the ramifications of this are is that it starts with a low to medium penetration chance, so less than 50%, and increases quickly due to durability of the armor being removed as you're hitting them. So it's going to take 3 shots or something before you're going to get through. Now, often in Tarkov with the time to kill, that might mean that you die really, really easily because you just won't actually penetrate them by the time that they've killed you. So I'd just be really careful about the number 4. Like, it's okay and you can do it, but just keep in mind like why you're doing it and the downsides if you do decide to run something that's got a 4 effectiveness against something that you think might be an armor that you're likely to run against. So the next thing I want to touch on just briefly before we move into the ammo chart itself is about kind of the 2 schools of thought in terms of the types of ammo that you want to go for. Now, 90% of players go for high penetration rounds, and the reason for this is because if you can shoot somebody in the thorax and you can get the thorax to 0, then they die. Ultimately, that's it, right? The health system in Tarkov means that your arms and legs and stomach can absorb a lot of shots before you get killed due to your overall health pool being quite high. Remember that your overall health, we'll have a look at it in a second, but your overall health pool is 440, so this is quite a lot. Whereas the thorax, let's actually just pull this up, thorax only has 85, so you only need to inflict 85 damage to the thorax to kill somebody. Whereas if you're fighting all of these other components, you have to basically get them down to 0 health from 440 health. So it's a massive, massive difference. This is the reason why the high pen meta actually works. And again, this is the reason why a lot of players in Tarkov wear armor, and all of it covers the thorax, is because it's the most important body part. Headshots, I wouldn't worry too much about it. If you can hit headshots consistently in this game, you're going to win most of your fights. So let's not worry too much about the headshots, except against something like an Altin is only really where it matters, where they've got level 5 on their head and face. But outside of that, normally the high pen meta is really about dealing with the thorax and occasionally about dealing with the head. So the flip side of this is the leg meta, or high flesh damage rounds. And the reason why this can work is if you choose something with an extreme amount of damage but almost no penetration power, and you shoot for the legs, there is no leg armor in Tarkov, which means that these are always unprotected no matter what people are wearing. So somebody could be wearing, level 6 thorax and level 5 head, but their legs are still unprotected. And if you can shoot enough bullets at their legs, you'll finally be able to kill them through that 440 health pool that I mentioned. Now, why does the leg meta work? With the right arm, when the right arm gets destroyed, same with the left arm, additional damage taken is distributed at 0.7. So there's actually a debuff in terms of the damage that you deal and how that gets distributed across the body. Whereas on the legs, when they're destroyed, additional damage gets distributed over at 1 times the damage dealt. So you're actually more effectively dealing damage if you shoot people in the legs when they're blacked than in the arms when they're blacked, which is quite interesting. Now, a second point to this is the fact that the legs are both right next to each other, which means it's a lot easier to shoot these two. If you're trying to shoot right arm or left arm, you've got the stomach and the thorax in the middle, which can be protected by armor, so that's not really as efficient. And then there's also one other point, which is that you've got the stomach here, which you might also accidentally hit. Now, not all armors protect the stomach, and this is interesting because it makes the leg meta better as the wipe goes on, because a lot of the top tier armors, especially the level 6s and level 5 rigs, which are really, really good, only protect the thorax, which is the meta, because people often have the view, I actually agree with this, that if you have stomach protection and you take damage to your stomach, you can always fix your stomach with a CMS. So you'd rather actually just take the damage straight to your stomach and not have your thorax armor be destroyed for the reasons that we talked about previously about the high penetration meta, right? Because the more armor that you've got, the less likely it is for bullets to go through and penetrate on your thorax, and you can take a black stomach and you can heal it up with a kit, but you can't heal your thorax and you die. So this is kind of makes the leg meta actually even better, because it means a lot of stomachs are unprotected, and stomachs, interestingly, take 1.5 times the amount of damage once they're destroyed. So this can be absolutely devastating against top players, especially if they're not wearing stomach armor. Right, so with all of that said, let's actually go into the chart finally. So the first class that we're going to be looking at here is a lot of shotgun stuff. Now, I don't want to spend too long on shotguns because broadly speaking, I don't really use them that much. But if you have a look, there's an awful lot of different rounds for it, which is crazy. A lot of different shells. So the first couple we're going to look at is buckshot. This is the standard, and this is the one that it comes with. This is actually okay. It's actually all right because it's a pellet type shell. You get a number here, which is the number of pellets that you get, and then a damage. So this is 8 times 37. One thing we should note if we go back to our health chart is that 37 damage is enough to kill the head in one shot. So this is important. It means all they need to do is take 1 pellet. This is actually what makes shotgun scav so scary right now, because 1 shot from this to the face and you die if you're not wearing a face shield. And this is really where the ammo chart sometimes can be a little bit disingenuous. So there's a couple of little asterisks here. 2 asterisks which says, assuming all projectiles hit the target on every shot, because projectiles cause a minimum of 1 durability loss to armor, it becomes effective at breaking down armor and eventually penetrating, which is a 3, right? Which is 5 to 9 average bullet stopped, has low penetration chance, but slowly gains chance or quickly damages armor until it penetrates. Now, I really wouldn't rely on this at all to penetrate armor whatsoever, and this is why you see people wearing face shields on maps like Factory and other places just to stop scavs from one-shotting you in the face with buckshot, because as I said, all it takes is 1 pellet. So next up we have Magnum buckshot, which is basically a cheap Chad killer. This is 8 by 50, which is an incredible amount of damage. So the first one that we looked at before, 8 by 37, if you hit every single pellet, that's going to cause 296 damage, whereas Magnum buckshot will cause 400 damage if every pellet hits, which is absolutely insane. It's unlikely every pellet will hit, but a couple of rounds of this into people's legs and they will die. This is probably the first leg meta round that we're going to look at. Express, I wouldn't really bother with this one, to be honest. It's very similar to regular buckshot, slightly less damage, 1 more pellet. Not really sure what the point of this is. Now, as we move on, we've got Flechette, which comes up next. And this is a kind of an interesting one. I've had mixed results with this personally. Again, this is 8 by 25. Note that this can't actually kill with 1 shot to the head with 1 of the darts. This is actually a series of darts inside the tube. The interesting thing here, though, is that this one has 31 pen. So this will effectively penetrate a lot of face shields, and is quite good at dealing with armor too. And so bear that in mind. This is actually one of the potential useful shotgun rounds. Next up, we've got Rip. I wouldn't honestly use Rip. It only does 265 damage. It's a slug, and I would rather use Magnum Buck. If you're going for flesh damage, I think Magnum Buckshot is probably better. No one's really trying to do leg meta over a decent distance, and it's much harder to hit a Rip round than it is, Magnum Buckshot 8 pellets into somebody's leg. So I wouldn't worry about this one. Out of all of these other slugs, honestly, they're really not very good. The only one that's really worth mentioning at all is the Superformance one, which is this one, which I have used with PSO on the Saiga 12 to kill scavs because of the 170% accuracy buff, which allows you to shoot over decent distances. But outside of that, honestly, I wouldn't use really any of these, except for the AP20 slug, which is probably the best one, and that's literally just down to the penetration. So 37 pen isn't that good. It's a 5 against level 4 armor, but it does a ridiculous amount of armor damage percentage, and so when combined with the ridiculous damage that this does in the first place, this thing can quite easily two-shot people in the thorax or one-shot people who are wearing level 4 armor, and is quite good at it. So if you're going to run like the high pen stuff for the shotguns, AP20 Slug is your best choice. If you want to be damaging armor and going through face shields, Flechette is probably the best choice. And then if you want to do leg meta, then you probably want to do Magnum Buck. All right, even more shotgun shells. I'm not going to talk about this one. These are for the TOS. The TOS is not very good. You can kind of use whatever you want. I think you just use the base one, the one that it comes with, the default, and not worry about it too much. I wouldn't use a slug in the TOS. So next one, we have the KS-23. This is the new shotgun that got added to the game, which is kind of a bit of a meme. The star round is a flashbang, which is insane. I've been caught by this a couple of times on factory. If it flashes you in the face, you can't see anything for like 20 seconds. It's incredibly powerful. Out of the two other rounds that you can use this for, which are kind of like more regular rounds, the Shrapnel 25 and the Shrapnel 10s are both really powerful. So we saw before that these guys had like 37, 50, and 35 damage. These do 78 and 87 damage for each pellet, which isn't a ridiculous amount of damage. So if I just go and have a look at this, right? Shrapnel 25, if you hit every single round for this one, then we're talking about 624 damage and 696 damage. This is well over a health pool of a PMC. This is crazy. If you only hit 7, that's 546, and if you hit 6, that's 468, right? So 468, if you hit 6 out of the 8 pellets, you're still killing somebody in one shot to the legs, which is pretty crazy. If you hit 5, it's 390, so not quite with Shrap 25, which is the reason why a lot of people choose Shrap 10, because if you hit them with 5 pellets out of the 8 with Shrap 10, that's 435 damage. So that actually only gives them 5 HP left. So they're going to be in a really bad way. They're probably going to be bleeding, and a lot of the time they're just going to die anyway afterwards. So this thing is really powerful at close range. The barricade round is the other choice for it. It's 192 damage with 39 pen. It's a bit like AP20 slugs, honestly. This only has a 3-round magazine, so if you screw up with it, it doesn't really work out very well. So I'd rather just use the Shrap 10 with it. I think it's probably the best. Okay, next up we have 9x18. I'm not a fan of this caliber at all. I think it's kind of rubbish, but there's some people who like it. There's not that much good stuff here for the leg meta. There's one with like 77 damage, which is okay, which is the SP7s. And so that means that basically if you hit them 6 times, that's going to deal 462 damage and kill them, which is possibly okay. Maybe you can use that in the KLIN. So there's a couple of pistols that use this, and then in terms of full auto guns, it's the KEDR and the KLIN. And the KLIN is 1000 RPM, so it has a decent fire rate, so you might be able to kill somebody with this. The one point to note is that PMM will only fit in the KLIN, it won't fit in the KEDR, because as you can see here, it says because of its increased powder charge, it cannot be shot from the KEDR or the KEDR B submachine guns, because it's got 30% increased powder charge in it, and so that's kind of like stuck to real life. Now, interestingly, there is one round that's got a higher penetration than that, which is the PBM, which has got 28 pen rather than 24. I mean, we're kind of dabbling down at the low end, though. If we look at the effectiveness against armor, we're really not standing any chance against level 4 and above. I really want my rounds to deal with level 4 armor, because a lot of people use the 6B3TM rig from Ragman, which is kind of like a staple for a lot of players. So this really isn't enough. And given that these two are both on level 3 prep, or I think it's a bit of a tough call to actually use these. So I don't really use them that much. If you want to run one of these weapons, then maybe run it on the flesh damage one, or run like PMM or PBM and run for headshots if you're doing budget runs once you've got up to that level. But otherwise, you can just use the default ammo and go for people's heads. Okay, next we have the 7.62 25mm Tokarev. This is for the TT and for the PPSh submachine gun. What's really interesting in this class, though, is the PPSh. This is actually quite a good submachine gun. It's an old style one, but it also has a 1000 RPM fire rate, which is pretty high. Now, the only way that we're really going to be killing people here, again, there's nothing that beats level 4 armor, even with PSTGs at age. So what you want to be doing with this is you want to be grabbing LRNPC, which has got 66 damage, and that's going to take 7 hits to kill. With 1000 RPM, it might work out. And you also get a nice little bonus of minus 10% recoil on this, but I'm not a huge fan of this ammo class either. Right, next we get on to something a little bit more interesting for me, which is the 9x19 Parabellum class. This has got kind of both ends of the spectrum that we were talking about before. You've got 9x19 RIP, which is 102 damage, which is quite nice because that means that you only have to shoot them 5 times with this RIP to kill them. You actually do an awful lot of damage if you hit them just with 4, because that's going to be 408, but it won't quite kill them, and they might just be able to scrape a kill on you beforehand. There are 2 other rounds, the Luger and the Quakemaker, that people also use as leg meta rounds. I'm not really a fan of going for like the more budget rounds in terms of leg meta, because you really do want to kill them. If you're hitting somebody 5 times, there's ample time for them to shoot you in the chest with high pen rounds. And I'm more of a high pen guy anyway, so you really want to be maximizing your chance of killing someone and be using these, even though they are quite expensive, to be honest, which is probably why people get put off from using them, because they're pricey. Now, a lot of the other bullets I just don't recommend using. You can buy PSTGZH right from level 1, and this has enough pen to go through level 2. So in the first week of the wipe, I was using this in an MP5, which is it's definitely good enough to go through Packers. The other two kind of top tier rounds are the AP 6.3. They used to be the best round for 9mm weapons, but this was always a little bit touch and go. As you can see, it's a 4 against level 4 armor, which, as I said before, you've got to be a bit careful with. You can get disappointed with AP 6.3. With the Vector, it's a bit better just because of the fire rate. In the past, when you've been using 800 fire rate weapons like the MP5 and mag dumping people and having level 5 armor just absorb like 6 shots in a row and then getting shot, you really do want to be aiming for people's faces late in the wipe with this stuff, but it can work. And 7N31 is a fantastic bullet. This is comparable to a lot of the decent rifle caliber rounds. There's a reason why it's so expensive. So both of these have been absolutely ramped up with the addition of the Vector to the game, but it is a very, very solid round. It's got the same damage as AP 6.3. 52 is very respectable, and 39 pen is decent. It'll deal with level 4 and it will deal with level 5 just about. But it's extraordinarily expensive. It's about 1,600 from Prapple right now and 2,000 on the Flea. So in terms of taking it in with you, I really wouldn't use this exclusively unless you are very, very rich. If you're buying it from the flea market, it's going to cost you 60,000 for a 30-round mag and 50,000 from Prapple himself. And the ammo is always nearly sold out on the flea. So be careful with this one. What I like to do is do a mixture of the two. I like to top load like 10 rounds of this into mags with AP 6.3 underneath. So if you've got a 30-round mag, maybe you put 20 6.3s underneath and 10 rounds of 7N31 on the top. Just an idea to make your runs a little bit more budget. Okay, next one, 45 ACP. This is kind of similar to 9x19 with a little bit less choice. I have the same thoughts on this. Rip rounds if you want to go for leg meta, ACP AP if you want to go for high pen. Now, the rip rounds, interestingly for this, are some of the best rip rounds in the entire game. I think this is probably the highest submachine gun damage, which is crazy because with the addition of the .45 Vector with 1100 RPM, you only have to hit somebody 4 times with this for them to die with 127 damage. So this is really good. This makes the Vector probably the best leg meta non-shotgun in the whole game. Now on the flip side, if you want to go up to ACP AP, it's got 70 damage, which is really quite good, and 36 pen, which is not quite as good as 7N31, but it's decent. Now with this high damage, it's actually really a force to be reckoned with. And because people are not using this one as much, people are using the 9mm Vector a lot more, this is actually much cheaper. So I think right now these are about $3.45 a round, which is not too bad, especially for the top round within this category. Another reason why this one isn't used as much is because it's new and really only the ACP Vector and the UMP use this caliber, and so it kind of limits people's demand for it just because there's not that many guns that run it. 9x21 Gyurza. This is a funny one. This only is used in one pistol that people call the Shrimp. Out of these, if you're using a pistol, you want to use the best rounds that you can. SB13 is surprisingly good for a pistol round, 63 damage and 39 pen. It's actually really quite decent. And the strange thing about this is you can only buy it from Prapple level 4, and it's about 1,000 on the fleet, and it's 350 from Prapple, so it's pretty expensive. But if you want something that's decent, and say you haven't completed like the stir-up quest, for example, this is actually not a bad choice to go for the SB13s, because you're not going to be firing that many rounds given that it's a pistol, and you can get 18 rounds in a mag. And so this is actually not a bad choice. This is really comparable, if not better than the 5.7. Alright, next one, the 5.7. So this is for the 5.7 pistol, named after the ammo itself, and also for the P90, the submachine gun that everybody knows and loves, with its beautiful 50-round magazines. Now, if we have a look at the 2 best rounds, I really wouldn't be using leg meta. I mean, you probably can. The one thing that surprised me about this is how much damage there actually is on this R37 round, with 98, which is really nothing to be sniffed at in terms of doing flesh damage, because this means that you only need to hit somebody 5 times. But it's not something that I've ever done, but you definitely could do if you wanted to. Now, most people use either the SB193, which is the subsonic round, or the SS190, which is the regular and highest pen round. These two things are quite similar, 54 damage versus 49, and 35 pen versus 37 pen. It's very similar. You're probably going to have quite similar results. And the P90's got a decent fire rate, which means that even though the pen is a little low, like if we look over here, it's like a 4 against class 4 for this one, for the 193, and it's a 5 against class 4 and a 4 against class 5. for the 190. Given the fire rate of this, it will actually shred through armor pretty easily, just because you're going to hit so many bullets on target. The fire rate is high and the recoil is actually quite low, and so you can just about get away with it. This is really the time when, if you want to make a compromise in terms of effectiveness against armor, with the submachine guns that have high rate of fire, this is really where you make that compromise. It's a little bit harder to make that compromise if your weapon doesn't have a high fire rate. I think one thing that really helps the P90 is those 50 round magazines, which allows you to throw an awful lot of bullets down range at people without having to worry too much about running out of ammo and them shooting you while you're reloading. Next up, 4.6x30. This is for the MP7 exclusively. In terms of which ammo is good for this, there is no flesh damage round. Action SX honestly sucks. Subsonic SX is not that amazing. It's got 36 pen, which is actually quite similar to the rounds for the P90. Now, a lot of people don't like subsonics. They have a special place in my heart because the MP7 isn't a zero recoil gun. Its recoil is something in the 50 region, which is not low, you know. It's not as low as some of the other SMGs, and this minus 22% recoil for me kind of makes a bit of a difference over some kind of medium distances. Over long distances this sucks because it's a subsonic bullet and it means that it arcs like a paintball, which is really really hard to control. Now, if you want to go for something a little more regular, FMJ-SX is decent. 40 pen will deal with everything up to class 4 just fine, and it'll also deal with level 5 just about, and given the fire rate of the MP7, again, this is actually a fairly decent choice. The only thing that I would say about this is that the actual damages of the MP7 is quite low, so 43 for this versus 54 and 49, and especially when you look at the APSX, this only deals 35 damage. So if you're actually, interestingly, if you're firing this over a decent distance, you could have enough bullet drag on that not to score a headshot, even if you hit somebody without a helmet. And this is actually one of the funny things that you had with the stim for a while, is that the minus 10% reduction on health, which they actually excluded the head in the calculation after people complained about it, meant that you could take a shot from APSX to the unarmored head and stay alive, which was kind of counter to everything that Tarkov's supposed to stand for. But outside of the low damage of the APSX, it's one of the highest pen like non-sniper rounds in the entire game. As you can see, this deals with stuff all the way up to class 6, and this is like a proper staple of the end game. People love using the MP7. It's probably the submachine gun that scales the best into the end game because it deals with tac decks, AACPCs, slicks, alt-ins, all of that kind of stuff it deals with. You do get a little bit more recoil, so you have to be careful, but 53 pen is very, very good. So this is kind of top tier for this, but FMJ is good and it is decent. Okay, 9x39. This is for the Val and the VSS. This stuff has always been good just because the damage has always been high and the pen has always been high. So the base round for this is 38 pen, which is already pretty decent with a 68 damage. Now these guns were nerfed a little bit because the recoil was increased because a lot of people complaining about them. I mean, these things are still CQB shredders, to be honest with you. They only come with small magazines, which is the biggest criticism that I've had of them, and I tend to spray a little bit too much. So if you've got some good control and you can use the 20 rounders, then be my guest. The 30 rounders are quite expensive for this weapon and you can't get anything bigger than that, and given the fire rate, using 20s is just a little bit subpar in my opinion. But in terms of the actual ammunition itself, it's very, very effective. SP6 with a 46 pen will go through pretty much anything. Only level 6 is going to have a little bit of a problem, but with 58 damage is very, very decent. And if you look up at the top end, I mean, the BP rounds, these are always really expensive on the flea market, but 60 damage and 55 pen is pretty crazy and will pretty much kill anybody if you catch them out or you're engaged in a fair fight with this weapon. Okay, so 366 TKM. This ammo class used to be complete garbage. All of these are just rubbish. I wouldn't use any of these at all, to be honest. The only one that's really got any worth is the 366 AP, which was added sort of for balancing reasons because no one was using these weapons. You can either put it in a semi-auto Vepr AKM style gun, which is okay. It has 35% extra recoil on it and minus 28% accuracy. This effect, I think, is slightly overestimated by players in terms of its effectiveness. We're not talking about a 3 times reduction of accuracy or anything. We're only talking about 30%. And a lot of the guns in Tarkov were shooting at short ranges and they're quite accurate anyway. So, if you're going to be like shooting into like a coin size distance, target a distance away, you make that like a third bigger. It's not really that big a deal most of the time, especially at the ranges that we're talking about. But this has kind of opened the game up a little bit for bolt actions. You've got that the hunting rifle that's extremely cheap for 366, which helps with quests like getting shots under 25 meters on other PMCs, which you can basically run this on factory, and it kind of opens that quest up and makes it a lot easier than trying to use the Mosin, because this thing can actually kill people with level 4 armor on in one hit fairly easily because it's got 90 damage. It's one of the few rounds in the game left that has a decent penetration and can actually one-tap thorax, since the thorax was increased to 85 health. So the 366 AP is one to bear in mind. It's got its uses, and it can be an interesting one. Right, now we're getting into the meat of the rifle rounds. So 545 by 39, the modern Russian round for rifles. There isn't really a leg meta rationale in here. Like 74 is okay, but people just don't really use these guns for that. This is really a high pen meta gun. That's really the point of it. And if we go through from low to high, you can buy T rounds from Prapor when you first start. This is the best that you can do. It's got 20 pen, which is not very good. You won't be able to penetrate class 3, but in the first week or two of the wipe, it might be okay, and you can hit people in the head with it, but it's the best you can do. So that's that. Then in terms of the next step up, PP and BP are really the next two that you want. BP actually comes with 74 Us from Prapor, so you can kind of get that early from him with 32 pen, which is decent because that's going to deal with level 3 armor early wipe, but you don't really want to rely on this anywhere after kind of the first month. Then you got the staple, which is BT. This is found all over reserve, which means on the flea market, BT is incredibly cheap. With 37 pen, you could deal with everything up to level 4 very well, and up to level 5, you can just about deal with. I wouldn't bet my life on it. I don't really like BT that much, partly because I don't really use AKs early, and by the time that I get to the point at which I would be using them, BT is already kind of outclassed. But BT is very, very cheap. Now, there's a big step between BT and BS and Igolnik, which is a little bit of a shame. So BT is kind of a bit subpar, and then BS and Igolnik are like decent at dealing with anything, right? So it's like 40 damage, 51 and 62 penetration power. And these two, there used to be clear cut between the two because BS used to be able to 2-shot thorax, whereas Igolnik used to only 3-shot thorax. But since they increased it to 85, now neither rounds can 2-shot, both of them 3-shot. So these rounds are kind of indistinguishable. You do get a slightly bigger frag chance on the BS, and so it is probably the better round in most scenarios, but there is a chance they won't deal with level 6 quite as well. But these two rounds are very, very similar now. There's a barter for BS, which is used to just be hot rods, but now it's hot rods and Marlboro cigarettes, so you can get it slightly more cheaply, but these things are going to be like 1,000 plus, which is a bit of a shame because there's not really any bridging between these. BT is cheap, and BS and Igolnik are very expensive because they are very, very good rounds. So this is really what puts me off using this caliber. I find it quite difficult to justify the cost of the ammo all the time. Keeping on the assault rifles theme, we're going to now look at 5.56, everybody's favourite ammo class due to the M4 and ADAR and a few other guns from using it. Again, there's not really much rationale for doing leg meta. You could try with warmage, but it's not something that people really do particularly. It's much more effective for going for some of the high pen rounds. In terms of what you might expect to use, I don't really know what all of these rounds are for, to be honest with you, because the default round and the one that you can buy at the start is M855. This used to be really bad, but they've actually buffed it. And so with a 30 pen, this thing is really good early wipe. This it's got effectiveness up to, you can not really deal with level 4, but you can deal with level 3. And in the first couple of weeks, people are only going to really be running level 3 armor, like press armors and all of that kind of stuff. And M855 deals with those pretty well. One thing that's really nice about 5.56 is the way it sort of scales up. So M856A1 then will deal with your level 4s. It is a tracer, so you have to be slightly careful about that, but with 37 pen, it'll deal with level 4s, as I said. And then when you get to M855, this will really deal with anything up to level 5. And you can see why people do prefer to use this in some ways. So if we look back, right, BT is 37 pen and the next one is 51 pen. Well, M855A1 sits really neatly in at 43, which is just a great penetration to have. It will struggle against level 6, and it has got like probably about 50% pen chance on level 5 armor on the first shot. But given the slightly higher fire rate of the 5.56 weapons in the main, and especially the M4 in particular, with 800 RPM, M855A1 is used by people all the way into the end game. And this is also used partly just because it's so cheap. You can get it from Peacekeeper. It used to be much cheaper. It's now about $5 around, I think. You can still buy it from Skier pretty cheaply too, and it's nowhere near as expensive as BS or Igolnik for the 5.45 weapons. And there is one more round in here, which is the M9M5. This is the toppest of tier rounds, and this thing is really expensive. I mean, it's multiple times more expensive than M855A1. Again, this is a 3-shot thorax jobby, but with 53 pen, it's very slightly better than BS, but not as good as Igolnik, but that's perfectly decent and will deal with everything up to level 6 armor just fine with no problem at all. And one other interesting point just to note between the two different classes here is with these top rounds, anyway, BP and above, the frag chances for it basically doing a double hit is like 16, 16, 17, whereas with 5.56 it's a lot higher. It's like 40, 33, 34, and even 32 for M9 and 5, which is actually quite a big deal. So that means that you could potentially one-shot somebody in the thorax if they're not wearing decent armor, or two-shot somebody with M995. There's actually a non-zero chance of that happening if it's 32. You know, if that's you roll that every single time, you know, you're quite likely to get that 1 in every 3 shots, which is really quite good. Very quickly on the 300 Blackout, I haven't really used this one myself, to be honest, but this damage doesn't make me want to use this at all. I really think you should just use the AP rounds. 50 damage and 44 pen. It looks very similar to M855A1, except it does 10 more damage, so it could be quite good. It actually has an enhanced bleed chance too, which is quite interesting. But I would just use it like 55A1. Just don't count on it penetrating immediately on level 5, and especially not on level 6. So just keep firing, and they'll die eventually. Right, next one. The big 7.62 39 round for the traditional AKs. Now T45, which is the middle round, this is the one that scavs come with. I've never really seen anybody use these at all. The US is subsonic. I've never seen anybody use HP or US. It's just rubbish. You're not going to try to leg meta with it because it doesn't have a high enough fire rate. This damage isn't very good. 29 pen isn't very good really either. And so you're better off either just using T45, which has got slightly higher damage, or PS, which has got a little bit better pen. And PS is super, super cheap anyway. I think, personally, PS is probably one of the, if not the best value round in the entire game for what it does. PS of 7.62 39 is like the king in the early game. It can deal with level 4. It goes straight through level 3. With 32 pen, it's actually very powerful. And so do not underestimate this in the early wipe. I think this is one of the main reasons why you can't buy 30 round mags for the AK, but it's another reason why the SKS is quite good. I'm not a huge fan of the SKS just because of the iron sights, but a lot of people use it, and if you do, then more power to you. It's a great weapon if you can use those iron sights and hit people decently, given you could buy this PS round right from the word go. Now, BP is the best round for this category. As you can see, it struggles very slightly with level 6, which is fair enough. I mean, level 6 is a very, very chunky armor, but against level 5, it's like a 50% pen off the bat, which I think is not quite good enough in terms of the top tier round. I think like the AKM platform has been made slightly worse, as I said in my previous video. And I think combined with the low fire rate and the fact that it's difficult to mod for recoil, and then with the penetration that doesn't quite make it up to the top mark, I find this a little bit difficult. It's a shame that this isn't slightly higher, or there's not another AP round here to really make it like top tier meta, but I find it quite difficult to run. But look, for routine raids, BP will deal handsomely with level 4 and pretty much with level 5 if you're going to hit your shots fine, and it does decent damage too, so you can definitely use it, and a lot of people use it to great success, so don't let me put you off too much. Right, now we're really getting into the big boys. 7.62 51 NATO. These rounds are pretty big. The default for this, which you can buy from Peacekeeper 2, is the M80. 80 damage and 41 pen is pretty serious. This, for me, is kind of on par with the PS round as the other kind of like best value round in the entire game. This guy will deal with everything up to level 5. It's really powerful. I mean, this will two-shot thoraxes all day long. Now, in terms of the other rounds, these ones are all scav rounds, and I wouldn't really use any of these, to be honest, if you can help it. M62 used to be very, very good. This was kind of a nice middle ground between M80 and M61, but the penetration on this was significantly reduced recently and is now only 44, which is really not that high. I mean, if we go back and look at some of the others, it's only one more pen than M855A1, which makes it much less compelling to use it. This is a tracer. It does do 79 damage, so it will still kill people, but I'd just be mindful about what you're paying for with M62 versus M80. I'm not sure if you really get enough value out of it to make it worthwhile. You do lose 5% recoil by running this one, so that's potentially a factor for consideration. But I would just bear it in mind and maybe just run M80 instead. M61, however, on the other hand, with 64 pen is insane. This thing will go through basically everything. You have to suffer 10% more recoil for that, but with 70 damage and sailing straight through level 6, you could basically be two-shotting thoraxes all day long, so there's really no problem with this round at all. This is one of the best rounds kind of towards the end game when everyone's running level 5 and 6 armor, because this will just kill people. The M993 round, I'm not entirely sure why it's in the game. With 70 pen versus 64 pen, this thing also still just goes through all the armor. It's got very slightly reduced recoil here, so I guess it's kind of a bit more meta, but really it's just kind of overkill, to be honest. Like, just use M61, unless M993 is priced at exactly the same pricing point as M61, in which case use it, but if it's any more expensive, then I wouldn't bother. Next up, we have the Mosin round, the 7.62x54R. So all of these rounds are actually pretty decent. So the scav round is the T46 tracer, which is very similar to LPS. So 82 damage versus 81, 41 pen versus 42 pen. These will only start to struggle with level 5 armor, to be perfectly honest with you. Outside of that, it's pretty much okay. If you want to upgrade to anything else, you really have a choice between using something that's got a similar pen, which is 7N1, which is another one of the few rounds in the game that can one-shot thoraxes, only just, so bearing in mind, like, it does 86 damage, and so if there's any real armor reduction or drag coefficient reduction over great distances, this thing won't be one-shotting thoraxes. But at point blank, there's a lot of contention in the community about whether 7N1 point blank shots through level 4 armor or not. I think the conclusion is that it will do most of the time, especially if you're very close to them, and so this 6 here is justified. This thing will actually kill people through level 4 armor. Level 5 it won't do, but the one great thing about this is it will also kill scavs in one shot too, so you can be quite efficient. Outside of this, if you want to make sure that you really do like slap through everyone's armor, then you've got SNB, which is nice and cheap, 75 damage. It's not quite a one-shot through the thorax, but with 62 penetration, this is another one that just slides straight through the slicks, straight through the hex grids, really no problem at all. And again, 7 and 37, bit of overkill, not really sure what the point of this is, to be honest. Again, you don't get the recoil percentage, but there aren't any full auto weapons in this category as of yet. And so I don't really see the value of this. I mean, I use SMB. I actually used SMB to complete Punisher 6 on Factory. It's very, very good, and I two-tapped somebody through their hex grid, and they were probably very, very sad about it, but it's extremely effective. Okay, on to the last couple here. So we've got 338 Lapua Magnum. I don't know why anybody would use these two, to be perfectly honest. The penetration just isn't very good. In terms of FMJ, this thing is okay. 47 pen, it's all right, and with 122 damage, if it pens, they will die, for sure. The Lapua Magnum AP is obviously the one that you want to be using. 79 pen, this thing is absolutely ridiculous. Overkill, will kill anybody in one shot to the thorax no matter what they're wearing, even up to level 6 with 115 damage. This thing is just a complete monster. There's a reason why these rounds are 30,000 rubles per bullet on the flea market. You can only find them in raid, and you can only find them in batches of about 3 or 4, which is the reason why they are so expensive on the flea, but that's really what you're paying for. You're paying for the one-shot ability to the chest, with any armor against any PMC. It's pretty crazy. Okay, so this one, 12x7, this is for the Ash. This is for the Ash 12. And really, again, I would just ignore these rounds, to be honest with you. I don't know really why you'd go for leg meta. I mean, 165 damage really isn't all that bad. It means that, you know, it's only going to take a couple of shots to kill somebody. I think most people are going to use this round here with 46 pen, which is, again, it's pretty decent. If this pens, it will kill you with 102 damage. I think the problem with the Ash 12 is that it looks really good on paper, but with the recoil and stuff, you're kind of better off using like a sniper rifle or something to shoot people over long ranges if you want to be like 1 or 2 tapping people. And at close range, you're better off just using another weapon that maybe uses like M61 or something, because like this is just a little bit of overkill. It's like too much in terms of damage and too much in terms of recoil. Like what you want is a nice sweet spot, you know? And I think this is just a little bit too much. This is why the Ash 12 just isn't that much more popular. It's a kind of a fun gun that people like to run. In practice, it just doesn't really work out very well. All right, the last couple are just kind of special ones. So this 40x46, this is actually the grenade launcher, and this is the shotgun on the grenade launch. In theory, this is very good. The price of the grenade launchers means that I haven't actually really seen anybody run this. Apparently, the spread is quite wide on it. I don't have any practical experience of this one, but I can't really imagine anybody running this ever. The last couple that you've got here at the stationary weapons, this one's got 3 asterisks because this is about the fragmentation, but this is actually a grenade launcher, so if this thing kills you, you're going to die. And then these two are the mounted machine guns. As you can see, they've got insane pen, even higher than the Lapua Magnum, and ridiculous damage. So if this hits you, you're going to die. I mean, there's just no two ways about it. These things just kill you straight up. Hope you found it useful, and if you've learned something or enjoyed today's video and want to support the channel, then please consider dropping a like and a sub, as it helps with visibility for those that haven't found me yet on YouTube. To see me when I'm streaming, you can follow me on Twitter and Twitch, where I'm currently live twice a week, once on Friday at 9 PM UK time for the Scav Talk podcast, which you can check out the link for in the description below, and a regular Tarkov stream on Saturday at 2 PM UK time. With all that said, I'll see you next time, and as always, have fun in your raids.